October 2008, Himachal Pradesh, northern India. We're traveling to Dharamsala, formerly a British tourist retreat. Today, it is the home of the Dalai Lama and to the Tibetan government in exile. Over 10,000 Tibetan refugees have also settled in the Indian city. Here, the Dalai Lama's speeches draw thousands of people from all over the world. Towering mountains are visible behind the hill. Not too far lies Tibet. Dharamsala's center is made up of two shop-lined streets that draw many foreign tourists. Tibetans first relocated to Dharamsala in 1960. Today, 50 years later, Tibetans are still waiting to return to their homeland. The new generation of Tibetans honors its ancestors' way of life. Though born in India, this generation has carried on its culture's traditions. Buddhism is the core of Tibetan identity and its binding force. The Tibetan reference point is the Dalai Lama. Buses and jeeps arrive and depart from Dharamsala's main square, center of the city's social life. Dharamsala's pleasant atmosphere is a reflection of its inhabitants. Tibetan people are discreet, calm, and cheerful. Openly expressing sadness for their country is considered shameful. A few references to China. One shop window reads, "We do not sell products made in China." Another window displays a heart-wrenching poster of the protests in March 2008, which were followed by terrible repression on behalf of the Chinese authorities. Photographs of people who have been killed or imprisoned. The community has prepared for the arrival of the Dalai Lama, who is returning from Delhi after a brief stay at a hospital. Elderly women and children are wearing the Tibetan traditional dress. The audience is quiet and composed. Women use rosaries in prayer. The Tibetan flag. The long wait has finally come to an end. White scarves wave their welcome. And here's the Dalai Lama. Recent Tibetan history is dramatic and painful. The Tibetan Museum. The Dalai Lama is a child on his throne. In 1949, China invades Tibet. A very young Dalai Lama met with Mao Zedong to sign a treaty that guaranteed Tibet cultural and religious autonomy. When the treaty was soon violated, the Dalai Lama was forced to flee. 85,000 Tibetans followed him. India became his refuge. Since 1959, he has tried to find a way to return home, all the while advocating non-violence as a method. This video from the Museum of Tibet shows the difficulties the country has been through. Over 1,200,000 Tibetans have been killed. 6,000 monuments have been destroyed. The repression continues to this day. Just outside the museum is a large poster that acts as a reminder of Tibet's reality. The individuals who protested in March 2008 during the anniversary of the Dalai Lama's escape from Tibet have all either disappeared, been arrested, or killed. This includes many young people and many monks who are not allowed to practice their religion and are severely punished if found with a photograph of the Dalai Lama. This footage shows the uprisings in the Tibetan capital of Lhasa in the spring of 2008. Young monks chose to express their grief after 50 years of Chinese occupation, knowing they would be punished for protesting. Acts of destruction became a last resort for some. This footage was taped by the Chinese police and later shown on several television stations. Since the protests, China's control over the Tibetan population has become even more severe. The number of people who try to leave Tibet by crossing the mountains in winter has dramatically decreased. Every year, hundreds of people perish while trying to escape this way. Since the March 2008 protests, however, the number of Tibetans attempting this route has fallen from the thousands of previous years to a small handful. Those who do make it to Nepal head for Dharamsala to receive the Dalai Lama's blessing and the chance for a scholastic and professional education. We meet with a few refugees. They have left everything behind. Too often, theirs is a one-way trip. This refugee says he has traveled from the countryside to the capital of Lhasa and then on to Shigatse. He reached the border in a truck. There, he began to climb the mountains with a larger group. They would only travel at night, fearing the Chinese border police. It was very cold, and their group was made up of largely women and children. The person leading them through the mountains left them near the border after showing them the way they should take. They were lucky. This young refugee says she was very frightened. It was extremely cold. She fled with her brother. In Tibet, she would have had to study in Chinese. Her parents hope that her future will be better here. Now, she would like to study in a Tibetan school. This refugee described how he helped his younger sister escape. He has just arrived and does not know what he will do next. He says he would like to finish his studies, but is already an adult. He would like a good job and a more certain future. In order to understand the state of human rights in Tibet after March 2008 and after the Beijing Olympics, we have asked to interview the director of the Center for Human Rights, an NGO that has been following the Tibetan struggles for years by publishing informative materials of great importance.
Since the 10th of March protests inside Tibet, the Chinese government has arrested many people and more than 100 people died under this repressive action of the Chinese government. And today, according to our sources, more than 1,000 people have been disappeared from Tibet. And the Tibetan people inside are living under threat. They are always in danger. You see, Tibetan people now, after the 10th March, even the Tibetan people inside Tibet are very much afraid to speak outside. Tibetan people who are living outside. So before the 10th March, there was contact between the Tibetan people inside and outside. But after the 10th March, there was so much of restriction of the Chinese government. Everywhere you see military forces. But the Chinese government, they claim everything is normal. But everything is not normal. If everything is normal, why they put such a number of military forces in the cities? If you go to cities, in the monasteries, you find military forces. This clearly indicates that the Tibetan people live under threat of the Chinese repressive policy. So that is why now the information inside Tibet has also dried up. They have after the March protests, there have been restrictions, even though they say like the Tibet is open for the foreign tourists, but very few selected people are allowed it, and those are also guided by the Chinese government. So they're not free to move inside Tibet and free to talk to every common man. So it's very difficult to assess the real situation inside Tibet. So according to us, it is very concerning about the human rights situation inside Tibet. More than 6,000 people have been arrested, more than 1,000 people have been disappeared, more than 100 people have been killed.
Now the tribunal will decide about these people.
Yes, actually Chinese government, they say the tribunal will decide about the fate of those who are involved in the demonstration. But you see in the Chinese tribunal, it is, whereas in a democratic system, the legal system or the law of the country or the constitution is to protect the rights of the people. But in the Chinese case, they use the law to abuse the human rights of the people. So there is, you can't expect justice from the Chinese tribunal. There is no systematic legal process to get justice in the Chinese tribunal. So which is unexpected. So the Tibetan people will not get justice under the Chinese tribunal. So they will suffer.
So, and what it means to be in the Chinese prison?
You see, inside prison, the Tibetan people, the prisoners inside are inhumanly treated. The situation and the torture they suffer is unspeakable. The Human Rights Commission Special Rapporteur on Torture, Mr. Manvek Nawar, had visited Tibet, and he has given in his report, and he has mentioned in his report that the Tibetan people inside prison, they have been really tortured by the Chinese government. The prisoners, they really suffer in the prisons. Even they are not given proper food, not given proper medical treatment, and they use different kinds of weapons or different kinds of things to torture the Tibetan people, the Tibetan prisoners. And you see, there are so many Tibetan political prisoners, former political prisoners here in Dharamsala. If you go through their testimony, it is unspeakable. Even after they are released from the prison, they are half men. They have different kinds of problem. Physically, they are, challenged. Physically they can't do anything. They can't do any kind of job. They are sick. So after the prison life, the people, former political prisoners, they spend their life like a half man.
In order to learn more about the reality of Tibet, we have asked to interview the head of the Voice of Tibet radio station, Karma Yeshi, a well-informed journalist and parliament member. Voice of Tibet was created by a Norwegian NGO for both the Tibetan and Chinese population in Tibet.
Information from exile to inside Tibet, and it's very, very important. We cannot send documents inside. If somebody caught documents related to Dalai Lama to Tibet, he or she will be arrested and punished like anything. And this radio is the only medium so that we make unbiased news on Tibet, activities about Tibet, activities about His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and air it to Tibet through shortwave radio. And that's so that people inside Tibet at least can get some fresh news about Tibet, not from the Chinese version, but from the Tibetan side also. That is why it was started. And then the feedback says there was a request by a Tibetan inside Tibet to us, please broadcast His Holiness teaching, broadcast His Holiness public speeches now and then. It's very precious for people inside Tibet. They do want to listen to him but cannot. So like that. No? So one person who met me in my office said, Karma, please broadcast his teaching, his public speeches. When people listen to his speech on the radio, Tibetan people do procession to the radio. So this is, he was requesting like anything with tears in his eyes, like that. So our radio is playing a very, very important role in giving information.
How is the real situation?
Okay, like according to the very, very, very old census before 1959, we say Tibet population is 6 million. After that, we cannot do any census because it's under Chinese occupation. Now, say Chinese official status says that there are more than 7.5 million Chinese in Tibet, whereas we were only 6 million. Okay, and that's official data shown by Chinese government. Unofficially, I think there will be more than 9 million Chinese inside Tibet. So we are already outnumbered. The Tibetans have become minority in our own country. That is risking our language, culture, identity, everything. So, for example, if you look at the Lhasa city, almost 95% of the shops, markets belongs to the Chinese. Hardly 5 to 10% belong to Tibetans. And all the Tibetans have to depend on Chinese. So in Lhasa, if you don't speak Chinese, you cannot do anything. That's why market language has become, Chinese has become a market language in Lhasa. So that's why Tibetan culture, everything is in great danger. So that's why even the Chinese, they are forcefully asking the Tibetan lady to marry Chinese so that they mix the population like that. So like because of railway and because of settlement project by the China, and then they are also giving special benefit to the Chinese people who's coming to Tibet, settling down like that. So many Chinese people are now settling down in Tibet, and the Tibetans are being outnumbered by the Chinese, and that's a great, great risk for our culture, identity, language, religion, whatever.
There are numerous stands on the streets of Dharamsala that sell jewelry and sacred Tibetan objects like rosaries. Almost everything that is for sale is produced by the same women. Many of them are refugees. Many of them could tell many painful stories of abuse they have suffered on behalf of the Chinese establishment. In Tibetan society, women seem to be powerless. How are women treated in Tibet? The answer is given to us by Dardan Charling, the spokesperson for the Tibetan Women's Association and head of their research department.
And likewise, once the policy came into effect, there was a huge and a massive mass sterilization and abortion that had taken place in Tibet. And this kind of, I think, marred the social essence of a woman's life, and that was very, very tragic. And in the women in exile, we think that is the gravest form of human rights violations, and we took up their cause, and we are still voicing against such grievous family planning policies in Tibet. And lately I've been interviewing a lady who's 42-year-old. We have a sponsorship provision for her here. She's come from exile from Tibet, I think 3 years ago. And she had a very sad story to tell. After her second child, she was pregnant for the third time, and she told us that she knew the presence of a family planning law, family planning policy, but she wouldn't stop having her children because Tibetans believe that a child is a God's gift, and it is the biggest sinister act if you try to curb your birth. And so likewise, she went ahead with the child, and when she was 7 months pregnant, I believe she was forcefully aborted, dragged to hospital, forcefully aborted, and then she got sterilized. And I think it was all done in a very unhealthy and unhygienic manner, very insensitive manner. that was way back in 1997, 11 years after when the reception center, which is under the government in exile's home ministry, when they took her and the other sterilized women to get operated and to have that rod taken out from her body. I believe the doctors couldn't take the rod from her body because it was inserted in such a manner that it's got imbibed into the flesh, and 11 years on, and it's still causing her a lot of pain. She's got back pain, she's got asthma, breathing problems, and her life is ruined basically. And that traumatic experience of what happened 11 years ago continue to haunt her, and she's not able to concentrate on anything. So this is, I think, just very inhuman, a very unjust act that's happening, and that continues to happen on Tibetan women.
Behind the peaceful facade of Dharamsala and its residents, there are painful stories of shattered lives. Their suffering is done in silence. Who are these two old men? What is their story? We are headed to the Center for Ex-Political Prisoners. Secretary General Pungsak Wangchuk has marched for Tibetan independence and led an uprising in Lhasa's terrible Dragchi prison.
아니 다치다네 나의 종간나 루디시아나 베징부리스 아니냐 디는 도투시기스 아니 가레스나다 나 정말 루트지제 아니 예 롭진나로라 아니 뼈랑제 좀 된데다 아니 군두기 게시티 된데 두스파조 템페체제 좀진 딜데나 나 종간도 추브리스.
Yeah, it is a long story. However, to tell you briefly, he was a student before he was imprisoned, and he distributed speeches of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and he also wrote articles of pro-independence. Articles of pro-independence. So that's the reason that he got imprisoned. And he was given 5 years of imprisonment. So after sentencing, he was taken to Dabchi, one of the notorious prisons in Lhasa, in Tibet. So he spent 4.5 years inside that prison. Okay, so in 1998, a big riot happened inside Dabchi prison because the Chinese authorities wanted the Tibetan political prisoners to bow before the Chinese flag, which is being hoisted. So all the Tibetan political prisoners denied to do it. So during that time, many Chinese police were sent inside prison, and most of the political prisoners was fiercely beaten up. So there was a political prisoner named Ngawang Dorji, whose head skull was being broken by the Chinese officials' continuous beatings. So there was another man named Thundrup who was a victim of continuous beating, that whenever he goes to open the gate, whenever he goes to open the gate and sees a Chinese police, he immediately gets shocked or like immediately refrain from going out.
아든데지다 다옹아베 날 성지레스 아니 권다지 공정알 성지디 권의 거지대가 티지 다 도투신다 아니 가 담담디 엔베디 라보파도 텔다 아니 다과게 도스탕젠 라보츠 구에메스 안 강베디나 마 다과도스타 타베도 담다 지스스나시 담지 안 마 샬레가 커블로 샤젠 군지 인터뷰 제수스.
So this incident happened in May 1998, and during that time he was taken away by the Chinese police and tied his hand on a plank, on a wooden plank like a Jesus Christ. So all his hands and feet were tied, and he was then his body was being lied down, and then the interrogation started. So during the time of interrogation, he was beaten so severely that he fainted 2 times. So whenever he got fainted, they splashed water on his face to recover. So during that night, he was confined in a solitary confinement, and his whole body was swollen up. So on the next morning, he was taken to an emergency hospital. So he was bedridden for 45 days with the glucose. So during that time, one of his mates were killed by the continuous beating on the shoulders. So after discharging from the hospital after 45 days, the Chinese authorities continued to interrogate him, which made him very interrogated, and beatings were continued. So he couldn't bear the torture, and so in July in 1988, he decided to end his life. So he took 4 needles and 2 broken glasses. Yeah, he tried to commit suicide by taking up these things. However, he didn't die and was hospitalized for a week. So during that year in 1998, 3 political prisoners were died, and 2 died of the torture, and 1 committed suicide. And in women's section, 3 nuns were killed by the beatings, and 3 nuns committed suicide. So this is the story inside the Dabji prison when he stayed for 5 years, and he was released in 1999.
These unpretentious buildings mark the home of the Tibetan government in exile. What were the political moves undertaken by the exiled government in an attempt to return to Tibet? The Parliament Building. The exiled Tibetan government is a democratic one. Political parties have not been created out of respect to the obligatory exile. Instead, voting occurs according to the Tibetan regions that existed before the invasion, the religious schools, and the Tibetan communities that have relocated in the rest of the world. The Ministry Council and its president are elected by the parliament. The Dalai Lama is the head of state. The fundamental goal of the government is to find a way to return to Tibet.
Since 1979, when the then Chinese Supreme Leader Deng Xiaoping, he approached His Holiness Dalai Lama that there should be a dialogue now between the government of China and His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Of course, the government of China does not recognize the Tibetan government in exile, but they approached His Holiness and said that now we should have a dialogue instead of staying as enemies without having any talks with each other. And we have to solve this problem. We have a problem together. We have to solve this problem, and so we should talk. So he approached His Holiness. But then he had one precondition for any type of talks. He said, you can never talk about independence for Tibet. Because if you talk about independence, that is splitting the motherland. That is not acceptable. If you don't talk about independence, then we can discuss every issue under the sky and we can solve them also. That is what he promised. And therefore, the dialogue process with the Chinese government started. And naturally, basically, because if we wanted to have a dialogue with the government of China, the precondition that we had to accept was not to demand for independence of Tibet. So it sort of, the middle way evolved from that sort of precondition put by Deng Xiaoping, whereby under the middle way approach, we are not seeking complete independence for Tibet, but under the Chinese constitution, a greater autonomy for all the areas, Tibetan inhabited areas, not only the so-called Tibet Autonomous Region, but for all Tibetan-speaking areas, a high degree of autonomy whereby only defense and foreign affairs will be dealt by central government in Beijing. All other issues will be, it will be a self-governing Tibetan entity under the Chinese central leadership. So this is what we are demanding since 1979 without any change so far, and this policy is still going on. We are pursuing this.
And why it is till now not possible to achieve these goals?
This is mainly because I can say 95% of the middle way approach plan has to be implemented by the Chinese government, not by the Tibetans. From our side, what we have done is, okay, we are not demanding independence. We are ready to live with China. We are ready to be governed by the central government of China, whatever our past history. So, but our only condition is that instead of having, now Tibet has been divided into many areas and incorporated into Chinese provinces. All the areas of Amdo, the birthplace of Dalai Lama, that big province has been divided into Chinese provinces. Not even a small piece is in a so-called Tibet Autonomous Region. Most of Kham area, the southeastern part, also are divided into Chinese provinces. So what we are saying is, under this middle way approach, without demanding for complete independence, we need the unification of all Tibetan inhabited areas, put them into one administration, under one autonomous administration. That is what we are demanding. But this has to be implemented by China. And since we now have come to realize that succeeding generations of Chinese leadership since Deng Xiaoping, except Hu Yaobang in between for a short while. Hu Yaobang was a very promising character whom we had much hope for, but he did not live long as leader. But then afterwards Jiang Zemin and now Hu Jintao, we have realized that they do not have the political will to actually solve the Tibetan issue. So that is why the blame of not reaching at any fruitful goal of the middle way approach lies flatly with the government of China.
For this reason, the pressure from the international community and the role of His Holiness are so important. They change the meaning of the Chinese government.
Yes, yes, very important. Of course, from the side of His Holiness, he has done whatever he can to make the Chinese leadership realize that we Tibetans are genuine, we are honest at not demanding independence, but the middle way compromise approach, which is good for China, which is good for the Tibetans. But they do not seem to realize this. So more than what His Holiness the Dalai Lama can do in the future, because I have already said he has done whatever he could. There is nothing much more for him to do. Now, the second part in the question about international pressure on Chinese leadership, that can be increased to a much larger, higher degree. So far, the governments, the parliaments, the individuals who support Tibet, their degree of pressure on the Chinese government is, I feel, not so much. It is in a very diplomatically way, in a very mild manner, they try to put it to the Chinese that they should talk with His Holiness Dalai Lama. And Chinese always say, oh, we are talking with the Dalai Lama, his envoys are coming. And the international leaders, they are satisfied. Oh, they are talking with His Holiness. But what are they talking about? What are these talks leading to? They are not pursuing. So the pressure from the international community could be much more stronger on China, so that the Chinese leadership will be compelled to make more effort to solve the Tibetan issue.
I read that His Holiness in Australia in 2007 said if we don't obtain a result very soon, in 15 years the Tibetan population in Tibet will be a little minority and the problem is gone. What do you think about it?
Yes, this is one eventuality. And I think actually the Chinese are hoping that this could be the case. Why they are delaying now, it's almost 30 years since 1979 when Deng Xiaoping approached His Holiness and we gave up independence and we are now talking about the middle way approach. Now it's going to be nearly 30 years, you see, and still there has been no solution to the problem. So the Chinese tactics, it seems to be that they should, in order to avoid international pressure, they talk with the Dalai Lama, they talk to his envoys, but without arriving at any result. So that in the meantime, if they prolong this, then His Holiness the Dalai Lama will one day, he will go away from this world. And then after him, they feel then there will be no leadership among Tibetans to lead the Tibetans, and the Tibetans will themselves finish off like that. This is their hope. But I don't think it will come to such a thing. Actually, what the Chinese leadership does not seem to realize is that His Holiness the Dalai Lama is the greatest asset for them to solve this Tibetan problem. This is a problem, big problem for the Chinese, actually. It is a problem for us, but a bigger problem for the Chinese leadership. So His Holiness is the biggest, the best person to solve this issue for the Chinese. Because if he passes away, then His Holiness has put another eventuality also. So far as he has said, so far as I am here, I am able to control the Tibetans, especially the younger generation of Tibetans who are more about activism, you see, about, let us say, about violence instead of non-violence. So he said, as far as I'm alive, I will be able to control them. But if I'm not there, then Tibetans may opt another method to solve this problem. That can also be there. So there can be a lot of bloodshed also.
But at the same time, the Chinese population in Tibet increased more and more and more. And today, the majority of the population in Tibet are Chinese. And this is, I think, a very, very big problem for the cultural and religious autonomy of Tibet.
Yes, definitely. You see, the two main problems why Tibetans in Tibet, even after having lived for nearly 50 years under Chinese communist rule, they are not happy and they are rising against the Chinese leadership, sacrificing their own lives. The two main problem is, the first thing, you see, the Chinese have always treated the Tibetans as second-class citizens. Although they say everybody is equal, we have 56 minorities and all that, but the Chinese government, the Chinese leaders, they have treated Tibetans as only second-class citizens. That is why they have mistreated the Tibetans, they have tortured, killed, massacred, denied human rights, destroyed our culture. So second-class citizens, you see. Secondly, as you said, Tibetans have now become a minority in their own country. So that is why they are not happy. When everything is being enjoyed and taken away by the Chinese and the real owners of the land have no say and they are second-class slaves there, then what is the point of remaining alive? It comes to that. And of course, cultural genocide has already taken place. So that is why now, so far, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, under the middle way approach policy, has been able to contain a lot of militaricism from the Tibetan side. But I think this cannot go forever, because after all, we are all human beings. So we have a limit of our tolerance, limit of our compassion also. So that is why the Tibetan desperation, the degree of Tibetan desperation has come to a boiling point. Now, if China really does not accede to the genuine demands of the Tibetan people, then the Tibetan people will forgive any hope with the government of China and they will take matters into their own hands. It has come to such a stage.
But then it will be terrible for the Chinese, but also for the Tibetans in Tibet. It will be real terrible, yes.
Yes, definitely.
During the last years, because of the Olympic Games, yes, the Chinese had contact with the Tibetan deputation, yes, but nothing is happened. And is some project, something new?
No, not at all. After the seventh round of talks took place when the countdown for the Olympics had already begun. So when they came back, they were more disappointed than the other rounds of talks which they had before. Our envoys who went there. And now the 8th round of talks is scheduled to take place in this month. Let us see. But now, generally among Tibetans, even among the most optimistic of Tibetans, they have lost hope. They do not expect much from China now.
If I may ask you two questions more, no? You said that the content of the autonomy is just cultural and religious, yes? and that the international policy, army, etc., this is just for Beijing, yes?
Yes.
But the economics problem are just Beijing has to decide about the economy or
No.
the Tibetan government?
No, no. As I told you, our under the middle way approach, our vision is to unite all Tibetan speaking areas, Tibetan inhabited areas into one local administrative government, which will have a high degree of autonomy. What is this high degree of autonomy? High degree of autonomy means that it will be a part of the People's Republic of China under the central Chinese government. And therefore, to show that we are under the central Chinese government, military and foreign affairs, these two things will be dealt with by Beijing, by the central government. Local Tibetan government will have nothing to say regarding military and foreign affairs. All other matters, economic, religion, culture, law and order within the Tibetan autonomy, everything will be dealt with by the local Tibetan government. That is why we call that a higher degree of autonomy or self-rule. We call that self-rule.
I ask this question because Tibet is the ground is very, very rich.
Yes.
Tibet has uranium and a lot
Yes,
of
yes.
very important minerals.
Yes.
For this reason, I ask this question about economics,
Yes.
because I think Beijing is very interested in this uranium, for
Yes,
example.
Yes, yes.
But this is part from the army, or do you understand me?
Yes, yes.
This question about the uranium, for
Yeah, yeah.
example, just Beijing will decide on this topic.
No, if the conditions under the middle way approach as we have envisaged, if it is agreed to by the Chinese leadership, then as I said, except for military, the security and foreign affairs, all other matters will be dealt with by the local Tibetan government. Therefore, economics, mining, uranium, etc., everything will be controlled by the local government, not from central government of China. But then your question is also very important. It is very pertinent because there are many reasons why China is not able to agree to the middle way approach. One of the reasons which can also be that from the military point of view, Tibet is so rich in many, not only uranium, but in many other minerals. Tibet is very rich. Therefore, actually, in the old Chinese Han language, for Tibet, in their language, it is Xizang. Xizang in Chinese language. Xizang translated, it means the Western treasure. From China, Tibet is to the west of China. So Xizang is Western treasure. Even from long ago, the Chinese believe that Tibet is a land full of riches. So that can be one of the reasons why they are not able to part with Tibet.
A way could be that, for example, uranium is part of the army, and then
Oh yes, yes,
and then it's no
Yes.
problem more.
yes.
Do you understand me?
Yeah, sure, sure. Uranium, not only that, the strategic location of Tibet. Tibet is the roof of the world. It is the highest point sort of in the world, you see. The Tibetan platform, if you are at the Tibetan platform, you are looking down all over the world. So the Chinese nuclear installations, the intercontinental ballistic missiles, they are based in Tibet. They are targeted from Tibet, and because Tibet is so high, now it is said that the capability of the ICBMs, these missiles are so strong that they can reach even the USA from Tibet.
But I think personally that the problem of uranium, for example, is just to solve if uranium is part of the Chinese army.
Yes.
Then you can discuss about middle way.
No, so far we have not come down to the level of negotiation. We are only talking. When it will come to real negotiations, then these details will come. from our side we put something, but then from there it is not necessary that the Chinese leaders will agree to whatever we demand. No, they will also try to have their pound of flesh. So then it will come to an agreement. At that time, definitely I'm sure they will say, no, we want to have, the central government should have all the say about all the minerals in Tibet, because uranium is included. Then the negotiations will go on.
His Holiness asked to organize a meeting in November.
Yes.
What is the goal of this meeting, if I may ask you?
Yeah, sure. The Charter of the Tibetans in Exile, there is a provision in that charter to call for what is called a special general meeting of the representatives of all Tibetans in order to get their suggestions about a very urgent or emergency type of situation that is prevailing. So this time, His Holiness Dalai Lama invoked that provision of the charter, and he said that there is a great urgency prevailing in Tibet now. So what is the cause of this urgent situation in Tibet? And with the current urgent situation in Tibet, we should look at the international scenario also. What is the international community thinking about this? And with looking at these two things, now we should talk about the Tibetan issue. What should we do now about the Tibetan issue? So on this, we have called this a special general meeting, and representatives from all over, of course outside Tibet, Tibetans from outside Tibet will gather in Dharamsala from 17th to 22nd November, and we will have this conference. I think this will mainly now focus on the current situation in Tibet. Why has this current situation, emergency situation, has arose in Tibet? And now from here, of course, there will be a review of what we have done so far, and then now from here, where should we go? What should we go? What should we do now?
But it is perhaps not a correct question, but what do you think? They have other possibilities.
You see, this November meeting, it has no constitutional power to decide on any issue. So, for example, it cannot say now we should change the middle way approach policy. It has no competence to change the policy. It can only give recommendations, suggestions to the government, to His Holiness. So it will have because it comes from the general public, the recommendations of this meeting will have a great moral effect. It will have moral strength on the government, on His Holiness, but it has no, from the point of law, it has no constitutional power to actually decide on everything. So in the November meeting, we will not be taking votes, or are you for middle way approach, or are you for independence, like that. No. It will only have a moral effect of recommending on the government what they should do now.
Tibetans have been waiting to return home for 50 years now. They have managed to keep their struggle on the forefront of international news, but it is still a distant goal. Most live in India as political refugees with yearly visas. As expected, India also has a complex relationship with China, its giant neighbor. The Tibetan government in exile has had to demonstrate great caution in order to maintain this state of equilibrium. The flag for a free Tibet. In order to understand the state of talks between Tibet and China, we have been allowed a meeting with the Tibetan Secretary of Foreign Affairs, Sonam Dakpo, who is also the member of the Tibetan delegation which for years has met with its Chinese counterpart.
Since 2002 to 2008,
We had 7 rounds of discussion with the Chinese leadership, 6 times in China and 1 in Bern in Switzerland. But fundamentally, as I said, there was a great difference between the Chinese position and our position. But we sincerely believe that issue of Tibet can be resolved through peaceful means and through dialogue, because the world is changing, China is changing, and now this is the century where different countries who fought for independence and fought each other, they are coming together. Like, for example, we believe that the former East European countries, when they became independent, they fought against each other and declared independence. But at the same time, they wanted to be part of EU. Everybody wanted to be, because that is beneficial to them politically, economically, and socially. So we believe that if the issue of Tibet is resolved peacefully, Tibet is economically not well off compared to mainland China. So China can contribute in the economic development of Tibet, but at the same time, Tibetans can also contribute in the spiritual affairs, because Tibetans have done it in the past, and we can do in this century also. I think that's a mutually beneficial thing. So unfortunately, we are not able to carry forward the process is because of the unwillingness or lack of political will on the part of the Chinese leadership to resolve the issue of Tibet.
The big problem is the power in Beijing.
So yes, I think the political leadership in China or the government in China is in the hands of the Communist Party of China. So we sincerely believe that if the Chinese leadership has the political will, issue of Tibet can be resolved. But unfortunately, the Chinese leadership is very much concerned about their legitimacy. One of the important preconditions for His Holiness Dalai Lama was that His Holiness should accept Communist Party's government of China as the legitimate government of China. So I think they have the difficulty or fear of their legitimacy. So I think it's important that the world is changing. China wanted to play a very important international role, and if they wanted to play that, I think they need to have international respect, and to have this international respect, they have to follow the international norms of international relations. So in that way, though China is changing definitely, the China of today is not China of 1960s or 1979, or China of today's China is not even of Deng Xiaoping's period. It has made tremendous economic and other social progress, and I think it's a good sign, and it's a good change for better. So in that way, the problem is, yes, the Chinese leadership is very much concerned of their legitimacy.
And do you think that in future there will be changes?
Yes, definitely. I think if you look at China today, especially to the coastal areas of China, they have made tremendous economic progress. With this economic progress, you have educational, social, and other changes. So that has really encouraged us that even if there is a problem, fundamental problem in the issue of Tibet with the Chinese leadership, but I think issue of Tibet can be resolved through peaceful means in future, because China is changing very, very fast, and the freedom, the freedom and the amount of kind of economic development and things which we don't see in the western part of China is there in eastern part of China. So I think with this change, definitely there would have to be a change all over China. For example, in Tibet, people are very scared or fearful of the Chinese government. They were not able to express their mind openly. They always fear because there's a lot of repression. But if you go to the eastern part, people can speak out openly. They can express views about the government. They can, for example, they can accuse the government of not doing things properly, despite there is a lot of restrictions. But in the in the Tibetan part of Tibet, it's very, very repressive, and people don't have the courage to speak it out. Even if you go to Tibet and then ask issues, definitely they will not be able to speak it out, because they are very, very fearful about the Chinese oppression there. So, but then despite that, I think China is changing, and with this change, definitely there will be a change in the Chinese position on resolving the issue of Tibet.
When is the next round of the dialogue?
During our 7th round of talks in first week of July, we agreed to hold the 8th round of talks at the end of October. So this is already October, and we expect to go to China in the end of this month.
And you know already the proposal, or?
During the 7th round of talks, the Chinese government officials, they said they wanted to have our views on the different autonomous arrangements and our views or our suggestions on certain issues. So we agreed to give them a detailed proposal from our side. So we have been discussing on these issues, and we have come out with a proposal, and during the 8th round of talks we will be presenting that to the Chinese government.
The Dalai Lama is the religious and political leader of Tibet. He is a global symbol of non-violent struggle for freedom. The Dalai Lama has been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize and is known worldwide as a teacher of wisdom and peace. However, the Chinese government describes him as, quote, a wolf disguised as a monk. But not all Tibetans agree with the idea of autonomy. A few NGOs represent an opposition to the solution. They advocate a complete independence from China for a truly independent Tibet. The most powerful of these organizations is the Tibetan Youth Congress.
Well, as an organization, Tibetan Youth Congress, our main goal is to regain Tibet's independence. And that's been since the inception of Tibetan Youth Congress in 1970. And even today, we still have the same goal. And until Tibet is independent, we will have the same goal. So there will be no change in our stand. And that's what we stand for. We believe that Tibet should be free. We believe Tibet is historically an independent nation, and we have seen the last 60 years of Chinese occupation inside Tibet, how the Tibetans have suffered. They have suffered tremendously under the Chinese occupation. So there is no future. There is no future for Tibetan people, the Tibetan nation, to be able to survive under Chinese occupation.
So, but what do you think about autonomy?
Well, I mean, we disagree. As an organization, like I said, our goal is independence. That's very clear. And as an individual also, I disagree for anything short of independence. That's what we stand for, and that's what we campaign for, and that's what we will continue to do.
And which are the methods to obtain independence?
Well, we have, in the past almost 40 years of the existence of Tibetan Youth Congress, we have organized so many campaigns. We have protests, we have seminars, we have workshops, we attend international conferences, we lobby different groups, different NGOs, we work with them, and there are so many different ways that we do in order to highlight the issue of Tibet on so many different levels, in so many different stages. That's what we'll do, and we'll continue to do that. And one thing that I want to make clear is that Tibetan Youth Congress, all our campaigns in the last almost 40 years have been peaceful, and it's nonviolent, and that's what we will continue to do.
And what do you think about the results of the campaigns now on the Olympics Games?
Well, I think because of the sacrifices by the Tibetans inside Tibet, beginning March 10th of this year, 2008, the issue of Tibet has been put on the global stage like never before. So, we have everybody talking about Tibet. We have, we're seeing Tibet on CNN, on BBC, in all the, big newspapers, what have you. As a president, I've also received many calls from all over the world, like I never had before. People calling me from, some corner of the world that we will never think they would call us. And that's all because of the sacrifices by the Tibetans inside Tibet. So, with that, we started the Olympic campaign. Different organizations, different individuals, Tibetan support groups, anybody who cares about Tibet, they did their best. They were out there, they were lobbying, and they were trying to pressure the Chinese government as much as we could. We have done that. Now, having said that, because now the Olympics is over, that does not mean that the issue of Tibet is over. The situation is really bad right now. Tibet as a nation is like a big prison right now. Because there's nobody's allowed inside, no international fact-finding delegation or no media is allowed inside Tibet. So basically, the Chinese government, they can do whatever they want. And we know from our experience that they are a very suppressive regime. They have been brutally suppressing monks, nuns, lay people, children, what have you. So, so the suffering of the Tibetan people inside Tibet has not ended. And we fear, actually, as a matter of fact, we fear that their suffering will be even more now that the Olympic spotlight is not on China anymore. So we'll have to, continue to do what we can in exile to highlight the situation inside Tibet.
So you believe that this pressure over China from the international media, etc., can obtain a change in Beijing?
Absolutely, no doubt. No doubt about that. If you look at all the phenomena around the world, all the things that goes on around the world, media do play a big role. Media does play a big role in educating the people. So when the news about the horrific crackdown on these peaceful Tibetan people came out, China, they were held accountable in a way, and they realized that the world is watching them. So media, no doubt, plays a big role, and I think it's important for the media to highlight the situation inside Tibet, whenever they get the opportunity.
Yeah. So you disagree the political stand of His Holiness, but you agree with His Holiness as religious head?
Oh, no doubt. His Holiness is the leader of the Tibetan people. There's no doubt about that. There's no doubt about that at all. So, you ask anybody out there, any Tibetan out there, we all love and respect our Holiness, and there's no doubt in anybody's mind. He is our ultimate leader, and in terms of political stand, we live in a democratic society, and we have the right to choose. So, and that's what we chose. And we don't see anything wrong with that at all.
The problem is the time.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there are people who say that, you know, if you look at India, they took 200 years or whatever to, you know, regain their independence from the British. But for us Tibetans, we don't have that luxury. You know, we don't have that luxury. With all the policies, you know, that China is implementing, we don't have that luxury. So, you know, time is really against us. And, you know, we have to push hard as much as we can.
Mass media fills our days with images of conflicts, massacres, genocide, and war. Many tragedies are not remembered for very long, despite their horrific nature. The Tibetan struggle, however, is still talked about because of the ongoing efforts of the Dalai Lama and the successful work of pro-Tibet organizations. Students for a Free Tibet is a youthful and enthusiastic international organization that has a large foreign membership.
What, you know, in terms of power, you have to seize the opportunity. You cannot ask somebody to give you, you know, power. Whether you ask for autonomy, whether you ask for independence, it is basically about power. You know, autonomy means you have certain degree of power. But how are you going to get it? They are not going to give you. Why should they give even autonomy? You know, that means whether you give, if they give something, they're losing their power. And Chinese government, we also need to understand that the Chinese government presently is not in a state, is not in a condition to give people more power, you know. And if they do so, that means there is a danger that the whole communist regime would collapse. The big China that we today might see it collapse. They see that. And we have to understand that no. So what we do is we prepare ourselves. You know, our goal should be the independence. But it does not necessarily mean it is realistic. We keep our goal clear and we try to work for that. And also looking into the present Chinese regime, where it is heading for. Because there is so much economic development that, you know, there is certainly a time would come. You know, China is going towards democracy. People, you know, even Chinese people want more freedom. Whether it's press, whether it's business people, everyone, whether it's farmer, they want more right. You know, for us, our strategy should be, you know, when at that crucial point, when at the transition, when China moves towards democracy, we should seize the opportunity. You know, we can only get, you know, we have to, political destiny, we have to take, Tibetan people should have the right to choose their own political destiny. So our mission statement is to make the occupation of Tibet costly. You know, and we have 3 different campaigns to work on to reach that strategy, you know, to reach the goal. You know, our final goal is independence of Tibet. You know, and to reach there, we know that we have to, you know, carry out step by step, because it's going to take a long time. We know for sure, but we need to take it step by step. You know, and the step by step means we make occupation of costly, you know, China costly more and more and more. So in terms of our campaign, how we do that? We have political campaign, we have economic campaign, we have human rights campaign. So in terms of human rights campaign, so as you know, there are hundreds of political prisoners inside Tibet. Since the last 10 years, we have been able to release among 10 prominent political prisoners inside Tibet. Ngawang Sangdre, Pinzo Nyidre, you know, Tana Jingmi Sangpo, These all were released by China because of the political pressure given to China. But our work is not finished. There are hundreds more, inside Chinese prison that we need to work on. But it's that we have been able to release some of them. And we believe that because of the grassroots pressure, in different countries. So this is one area where we work on. And the second one is the economic campaign. In terms of economic campaign, what we do is China, to sustain its occupation, it needs money. So what we want to do is we want to make that the occupation costly for the China. Our strategy is that when it is too costly for the China to rule, to continue its rule, at that time when it's too costly, they will automatically go back. So what they do is to continue the occupation, they need investment. They need investment with help of other countries. So what we campaign to stop this investment going into China. Like we stopped BP, the oil company. We stopped BP from investing in PetroChina. PetroChina is a state-owned petrochemical giant, Chinese oil company, from laying an oil pipeline from Tibet to China. We stopped BP from giving money. And also we stopped World Bank from giving more than $100 million because that money the Chinese government wanted to use, wanted to resettle Han Chinese into Tibet. We stopped that in 2000. So these are our strategy which have succeeded. It is our economic campaign. And also now in economic campaign, we also have the mining campaign. As you know, Tibet is the roof of the world. For centuries, we have kept the land as sacred. Everything in Tibet was sacred for Tibetans because we believe that the land, the water, the mountain, everything possess spirit. So we worship them basically, the lakes. We didn't exploit the natural resources. In fact, we were the first country, when the 13th Dalai Lama, when he ruled Tibet, he banned the Tibetans from hunting. In terms of environmental protection, we were the first country to bring out this new rule. So basically, we were, respecting the land, we were respecting. But what's happening now is because China is becoming economically more stronger, there's more industries. For the industry, they need more energy and raw material. So Tibet has abundance of raw material, uranium, gold, copper, and oil. So what they do is they are exploiting our natural resources. They have cut down huge number of forest land. They have extracted copper, gold. So, but at the same time, to extract these natural resources in large number, they need the help of Western companies. So now these days, more and more Western companies are trying to invest. Mining companies are trying to invest in Tibet. If I give you the example of Continental Mineral, it's a Canadian mining corporation. Now they are applying for a license to mine inside Tibet. So what we are doing is we are campaigning against Continental to stop investing in Tibet and exploiting their natural resources. There's a place near Shigatse which is called Shitong. So they have found huge deposits of copper. So they wanted to exploit it. So this is within our economic campaign. And in terms of political campaign, what we do is whenever the Chinese leader, they visit other country, we make sure through our demonstration, through our grassroots organizing, we make sure that the issue of Tibet is being heard by the leaders at the top, the Chinese leaders at the top. We ensure them that Tibet issue needs to be resolved. We embarrass them because they have violated the basic fundamental human rights of the Tibetans. That's why you see everywhere, whenever Chinese leaders come to Switzerland or United States or India, there is protest. And also we make sure that when other leaders, Western leaders, Indian leaders, when they go to China, to Beijing, to talk about trade, we make sure through our members that the issue of Tibet is being raised, while talking trade. So, Sarkozy talks about Tibet, Bush talks about Tibet. Why? Because there is a grassroots pressure. And unlike China, in the West, elected members are responsible to their people. So if we have a bigger base of membership, more people raising for the issue of Tibet, then these leaders have to take the voice of their own people. As I told you before, when the World Bank campaign was going on, the cynics told us that you are not going to win, because on the one hand there's World Bank, which is one of the most powerful organizations, and on one hand there's China, no way, But then we continued our campaign for 15 months, in which there were protests. Some of our activists, we climbed the World Bank office in Washington, D.C. Some of the, many people, we faxed the World Bank office, telling them to stop giving money to, China. So what happened was, twice the fax machine broke in the World Bank because there were so many fax coming on. And we believe that these are, even though these are small victories, but these are the first victory for us Tibetans. Since 1959 till now, the whole Tibetan movement, we spend we never really fight. What actually happened was all our resources, what we had, the very little resource that we took from Tibet. Actually, most of the Tibetans who fled from Tibet carried nothing. So in order to fight, we need to stand on our own feet. That's why the Tibetan movement spent almost everything invested in education, in hospital, in school. Now, today, after 50 years, we have young educated Tibetans coming out with new ideas, creative mind. We have more educated Tibetans so that we can, directly face the Chinese. Earlier, we were in no position to fight. By fight, I don't mean violently. We can fight non-violently, right? So these are the three campaigns through which we try to make the occupation costly. We accept His Holiness as the spiritual and the temporal leader of the Tibetan, not just in exile, Tibetans inside Tibet. 6 million Tibetans worship him as the king, as the religious leader, as the temporal leader, everything. But my point, our point, especially young people, we believe that we should not leave everything to His Holiness. Each and every Tibetan must take responsibility for a national movement. He alone is not able to do. We must help him. And since we are young people, we are educated, we know a lot about different movement, different freedom struggle. We have studied that, So what we do is we need to be creative. His Holiness cannot think of hurting the Chinese regime because of his his compassion for even enemy is so strong. But for us, we look at the current Chinese regime as an adversary, and we want to, play a more positive role into how to, bring them. I mean, it does not necessarily mean we hate them, but they are doing a wrong thing. We must, we must be able to pressure them from, from coming on the right track. We must pressure them that they acknowledge that there is human rights abuse. Whatever they did in Tibet is wrong.
Another NGO which hopes for an independent Tibet is the National Democratic Party, a product of the Tibetan Youth Congress. It does not, however, have a role in parliament. As previously noted, parliament represents Tibetan regions, the religious schools, and the Tibetans that live abroad.
Of course, one day there will be some result, of course, and I think, according to the political steps, sometimes political step is going up and down, and one day, like that, one day we will get our complete independence, because of course everybody knows that Tibet was an independent country. Tibet is and Tibet will be, but according to the Tibetan government exile, their path, their stand is middle way. Their stand is middle, and they are fighting for the genuine autonomy, because they are just fear for the demolish our culture, demolish and defect for our language, and sort of disappear some a sort of important our morality, and this kind of some important things. They are just focusing on them. That they are fearing for that. If we will stay out of Tibet for a long time, then all our traditional culture and all will be gone. So that's why they are fearing for that. But our party and Tibetan Youth Congress, they are always fighting for complete independence, because complete independence is not to have a complete independence is not easy, but it will take a time. But one day it will be success, it will be success. It will take a time.
The following are videos from the internet showing the protests of the NGOs. This is Beijing during the Olympics. This is New York City. This is a non-violent march in India, similar to the ones once organized by Gandhi. The Students for a Free Tibet coordinator. How long will the struggle remain non-violent?
Tibetan struggle so far has been very non-violent. We organized hunger strikes, demonstrations, peace marches. There's not a violence at all. In 1999, when I was the Vice President of the Tibetan Youth Congress, I was on hunger strike in Geneva, right outside the UN Human Rights Commission. Those days it was Commission, now it's Council, and we were doing a protest. Mary Robinson, the Irish lady, was the chairperson of the Commission, and then people were talking about Kosovo now and then. Those days we were dying ourselves. There were three of us sitting on hunger strike near that big chair, broken chair. And then they were not listening to us, no issue was raised, and we were asking. At last Mary Robinson came to meet us, and she gave for me 3 minutes to speak inside like that. But people were talking more about Kosovo, and because Kosovo is a direct threat to the European community, and they were doing more armed struggle. Tibetan struggle being a very peaceful struggle, if it is not supported by the international community, then if we turn our struggle from non-violent to violent, then it is not good for us. It's not good for the China. Of course, it's not good for the world also. That is why it's a high time for the international leader to support the non-violent struggle of Tibet. If non-violence has something meaning, if peace has some meaning, they should support it. Otherwise, they feel that, oh, we are doing hunger strike, we are doing peace march, there's no support, there's no media coverage, and people are killing, and oh, there's a coverage, And this media attention, all those killings and everything, and peace, there's no, then definitely we might, young people frustrated might take other way, which is not good for us, which is not good for China. Of course, then for that, it's a duty of the world leaders to support Tibetan cause.
The book salesman and writer Lensang Tserin is a historical figure of the Tibetan effort for independence. In the 1980s, he was able to return to Tibet to study the reality of his country's situation. After his trip, he immediately informed the government of what he had witnessed, but at the time, no one listened.
When I saw evidence of Chinese population transfer, I risked my life to come out. And to inform His Holiness, I said, the Chinese have this policy to send in Chinese settlers into Tibet. They have hundreds of millions to spare, and unless we do something urgently now, and that was 1980, I said, tomorrow may be too late. Now it is 2008. Do you see any evidence of urgent action? I am sorry to say, His Holiness the Dalai Lama and his government in exile is not facing reality and is playing into Chinese hands. The Chinese are playing for time, and I'm sorry to say, the Tibetan leadership is playing into Chinese hands. So on this issue of the population transfer, which has imposed a time limit, then there comes the question of His Holiness and what will happen after him. Well, His Holiness, you have pointed out, is not getting younger. He will not live forever. It is true, but he is still healthy. We all pray and wish he will have a long life. I am sorry to say, I hope I am wrong. As I see it, Tibet does not have that long. In the next 10-15 years, there may be so many Chinese, and you have correctly pointed out, today it is no longer busloads of settlers. With the railway, it is train loads of Chinese settlers who are coming in. Soon, there will be so many Chinese in Tibet. It will no longer be realistic to hope to regain a Tibet for Tibetans. By this, I'm not saying that, okay, this land called Tibet will one day not become independent from a government in Beijing. China as a colonial empire today is just too big. It could happen, but it will be another Chinese country. Take, for example, America is independent, Canada is independent, Australia, we don't have a British empire. Look at South America. But what about the native people? They are finished. And when I say time is running out, this is what I'm saying, and this is the reality His Holiness and his government must face. And I'm not sure Tibet has a future beyond the life of this present Dalai Lama. Sorry. Yeah, I have this dark and dismal assessment, but I have to tell you the truth. I hope I'm wrong, but time is running out for the Tibetan people, and His Holiness and his government are refusing to face this reality. Thank you.
We are at TCV, the Tibetan children's village in Dharamsala, during a yearly festival. The Dalai Lama is arriving. The young Tibetans who study here have fled their homeland by crossing the mountains, leaving their families behind. About 20,000 children reside in several TCVs, where they receive a good education and can maintain Tibetan cultural values. According to popular opinion, if the Dalai Lama had not fled from Tibet in 1959, he would not be living today, and the Tibetan culture would be at even greater risk of survival. Though Tibetan culture is greatly suppressed in its homeland, it is very much alive in India, in Ladakh, in Bhutan, in Nepal, and in the West. Ancient prophecies had predicted this cultural diaspora. Groups of young people march before the Dalai Lama. School funds are provided by international foundations. The schools give children access to higher education. A Tibetan university is opening soon.
The 40th anniversary opening ceremony march past is led by Master Gunduk Namgyel of 12 Science A, bearing the Tibetan national flag, and Master Ngawan Chimi of class 12 Science A, bearing the tricolor, Indian tricolor, symbolizing the centuries-old historical and cultural ties between the two countries, and the constant support that India has given us in the reconstruction of our lives in exile. It is also fitting that a student proudly bears the Tibetan national flag, symbolizing that our struggle for freedom is a powerful chain from generation to generation.
When the Dalai Lama speaks to young people, he stresses the importance of education and the value of compassion, tolerance, and nonviolence. Then, he explains the situation in Tibet and the state of talks with China. He explains that there are no existing plans for more delegation talks. Due to the increasingly desperate situation, the Tibetan community which lives in the West will meet in Dharamsala to express their concerns. The Dalai Lama admits that after many years of attempting to reason with Chinese authorities, he has run out of possible solutions. Now, he is asking the Tibetan population what to do. In all these years, Chinese attitude has not allowed for change. Now, the Dalai Lama is using harsh tones to express his disappointment. This is a historic moment. He is discussing the failure of his government's efforts. The Tibetan website Payul writes, "The Dalai Lama is losing faith in talks with China." China reacts to the Dalai Lama's statement by announcing a new meeting. The Dalai Lama signals strategy shift with China. Payul writes, "His Holiness only losing faith in Chinese government, not Chinese people, and not giving up on the Tibetan cause." According to Payul, the 8th meeting between Chinese and Tibetan delegations will, in fact, take place. The Tibetan delegation assembly begins in Dharamsala. The president of the parliament, Karma Chopel, makes a speech. Then it is the turn of the Prime Minister, Samdong Rinpoche. The delegations had prepared beforehand. The Assembly has decided to support their government's goal of an autonomous Tibet. Press briefing of the Tibetan envoys. Beijing backtracks on Deng Xiaoping's promise to further talks if Tibet gives up on the idea of complete independence. The fragile relationship has been broken. The Dalai Lama says China lacks moral authority to be a superpower. The UN Secretary General has asked China to continue talks with the Dalai Lama's delegates. Night falls on Dharamsala. What kind of future will there be for Tibet?